Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. In this vlog I'm going to be reading the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist, and I've decided this is the make or break year with me and the Women's Prize for Fiction, because this will be the third time that I read the shortlist, and whilst I have enjoyed one book at least from each shortlist, a lot of the rest of the shortlist in previous years hasn't been for me. So unless I can get 3 books that I really love from this shortlist, I don't think I'm going to do this again. This shortlist does have an advantage in that I have already read one of the books. I have already read Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, and I gave this book 5 stars. I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was wonderful. It is an adaptation of David Copperhead, and it does follow quite faithfully the beats of the novel, but it is set in rural Appalachia in the 90s and early 2000s, as opposed to London in the 19th century. What I loved about the book was the voice from which it was told. The Demon Copperhead felt like such a real character, and his voice was really well integrated. She used a lot of dialect when she was writing in the book, and Appalachia is where Barbara Kingsolver is from, and it is quite a sad book with quite a relentless feeling of misfortune happening to our main character, but there are also a lot of buildings of relationships and the ways that people can try to help within a system that is doing its best to harm. And I thought that the writing was just stunning, absolutely gorgeous from the very moment I began. I also listened to it on audiobook, and I think that really helped me because it was told with an accent from Appalachia, which is not somewhere that I have a huge familiarity with. Just so warm and so heartwarming and so moving and so just brilliantly written. The writing is just absolutely stunning. So because of that, I only need to like 2 more of the books that I actually read in this vlog for me to consider doing it again. We have several books to read. We have Pod, which is about a pod of dolphins, which is the one I'm kind of the most intrigued by, because I would never have picked this book up, but Lena Norms absolutely loved it, and it's getting so much praise for being such a strange little book. Then we also have Black Butterflies, which is I think the one I know least about. The Marriage Portrait by Maggie. I did read Hamlet when I read one of these shortlists before, and Hamlet was my favourite on that list, although it was not a book that I absolutely loved, and it is not one that's really stuck with me. We have Trespasses, which is Northern Irish fiction, which is something that I've wanted to read more of. As you may know, if you've been watched this channel for a while, my mum's from Derry, and so it's like half my family is from Northern Ireland. Well, more than half numerically, there's a lot of them. And there is also Fire Rush, which I think is a book with a lot of music in it. Dance Hall Darkness Dub is the music of her soul, and I think it's set in London in the 1970s. Yeah, we'll see how that one turns out as well. So that will be what the rest of this video is about. I hope you enjoy it, so we'll find out if I enjoy them too. Hello, I'm in Richmond by the river, and here to talk to you about The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. So I'm halfway through, been listening to the audiobook, and I don't love Maggie O'Farrell's writing in this one. I remember enjoying Hamlet, but it feels like the voice is exactly the same, even though this girl is 13, 14 years old. It's told to the third person, but we are entirely in her head, and it does feel no different than Anne Hathaway in Hamlet. It feels like she's trying too hard with the writing. There was a bit where she said the silk spoke a glossolalia all its own, and it just felt a little over the top and working too hard, and I could see the author's work in the work, and I don't want that. I want it to feel natural and easy to read, and it doesn't. It feels very self-conscious. It's about Lucrezia de Borgia, no, not de Borgia, Lucrezia de Medici, who is one of the younger children of Cosimo de Medici, who is the Duke of Florence, and she is married to the Duke of Ferrara. He's nearly 30, she's in her early teens, as I said, and she thinks he's going to kill her. And then we flash back to her childhood, we flash back and forth between her childhood, which has gone very quickly, and like her marriage to this man, and then forward in time to when she feels like he's going to kill her, and she's at this house all by herself, afraid of her husband, and we kind of see how she gets to that position, and it's fine. I think it would make a good, interesting TV programme. I don't really feel like any of our characters have been fully fleshed out who they are. Our main character Lucrezia is described as a sort of willful, strange girl who her parents don't understand her, and she's very different from the people she grew up with, and she loves art and animals, but she is not able to behave in the way that is expected of her
due to her position, but the way she talks and the way she thinks just feels a bit like disconnected from that. It feels like an academic older person. It doesn't feel like this sort of wild, willful young girl, and she feels a bit like a stock character as well, rather than developed. And none of the other characters are developed at all. Like, it is entirely Lucrezia. We are inside her head, and everyone else is like props for her. And so yeah, I'm not hugely enamoured of the writing, and I'm not hugely enamoured of the characterisation. The plot is good. The plot I'm getting on with, but apart from that, I'm not hugely enamoured. I also have brought Black Butterflies with me. It's in my bag, and if I get it out I will struggle to get it back in, so yeah, I've started that as well, and again, not really enamoured of the writing of that. It's set in Yugoslavia, specifically in Bosnia and Herzegovina, before the sort of Serbo-Bosnian War, in the early 90s. It's about an old middle-aged woman who, she has a granddaughter, so she might be slightly older than that, in Sarajevo, and her husband has taken her mother to go and visit their daughter and grandchild in England, where they live, and she is the only one there, and now they've closed like the airports because there is this unrest, this political unrest, and yeah, interesting to read about a period of history that the only thing I've ever read was a diary that was written by a child during the Bosnian War that I had to read at school, like it was the Bosnian Anne Frank or something. It was, yeah, so it's not something I know a huge deal about. I feel like both of these, I've not been hugely enamoured of the writing since I started them. I love the writing of Demon Copperhead though, so we'll see. Hopefully I will enjoy the writing of some of the other three. For now, I am in Richmond in the sun.
So I have read several books, finished books, and started books, so I still need to talk to you about. Finished The Marriage Plot by Maggie O'Farrell, and overall I just didn't really gel with this book. I've read this and Hamnet, and I liked Hamnet, but since reading this, I feel like Maggie O'Farrell has like one thing that she does in both of these books. These women who are the main characters in her story are tough, they are feisty, but they are limited by their society. They are slightly magical, they have like slightly preternatural abilities. In this one, Lucrezia can step into any room and it automatically know the status of all the people in there, and she's really good at manipulating that, despite the fact that she's been completely left out of any education that her sisters received because she's an outsider. Both of these women are outsiders who other women don't like. The other thing that's repetitive in here is Maggie O'Farrell's writing. A lot of the descriptions seem to be the same thing said 3 different ways in one paragraph, and unnecessary language, like her joints ached, the parts of her which articulated and moved were in pain. Like, you're just saying the same thing twice. I don't need to hear it twice. And it just annoyed me. The voice did not sound anything like the 16-year-old girl who at the end, that's how old our person is supposed to be. It sounded exactly like the middle-aged woman from Hamnet. It all sounded the same, and I found it much more tiresome in this than I did in Hamnet. Now, I listened to the audiobook of this and I read the physical book of Hamnet, and perhaps I wouldn't have been so annoyed if it wasn't for the performance in the audiobook, which had a tendency to hang on words in a over-the-top way. I didn't feel any of the tension. I feel like you know from the beginning that the woman in here thinks that her husband is trying to poison her, and so we should feel a build-up of tension. We should feel, if we know anything about Lucrezia, the Cosimo de Medici, we should feel a sense of tension. I didn't feel like the time period was particularly well evoked. I am tired of reading historical fiction books where we have such modern sensibilities. Like, let people think the way they would have thought. I watched Lena Norm's review of this. I've been watching her review of the books as I have read them, and I watched her review of this, and she said the ending was incredibly satisfying. I found the ending incredibly irritating. Who are we supposed to root for in Maggie O'Farrell, and who is allowed to be disposable? Class in here pissed me off, and yeah, this book pissed me off, and it's not that bad. Her writing is obviously very accomplished. I just found it irritating because it's one of those things, like when you notice a tick of an author, then you can't stop noticing that tick, and that tick that was mildly annoying becomes more annoying because you've made yourself aware of it. I don't know, I feel like I'm making it sound like this book is like a 1 star for me, and I don't really give stars, but for me this is just a fine book, an average book. It was perfectly fine. It didn't do anything interesting, and it did some things that were annoying. But it's not like a terrible book. It's not offensive in any way. I'm halfway through Black Butterflies by Priscilla Morris, and I'm enjoying this more than I thought I would. At the beginning I was a little put off by the writing, but as I go further on, it is not bothering me as much as it could. Like I was saying about Maggie O'Farrell, it is very accomplished writing, but it is not particularly interested writing. It's not doing anything with the writing to make the book. It's not doing anything with form. It's a very straightforward standard novel, but it's accomplished enough without doing anything irritating. So it's like you expect at least this for a book to be good. The character is an artist, and there are moments with the writing about art that does feel like just little heavy laboured metaphors that make me want to roll my eyes, but for the most part it is interesting seeing living in a war zone as a normal person and seeing the normal experiences that people are going through, trying to live their everyday lives, and seeing bodies on the street or dismembered hands or various other moments of like extreme trauma that they are living through, and it's a collective trauma because everybody is living through it. There have been a couple of moments that have pulled me up a little bit, but I think we can say it's because it's being written from this like slightly older woman. Tolerant and multicultural Sarajevo was before the war. That I don't know if Priscilla Morris is using that as a like tag to say that, see, people were just tolerant of one another, they weren't truly accepting, there was just this kind of 90s multiculturalism and just like a foods of the world culture day. It felt, or if she really is like espousing this new Labour tolerance and multiculturalism thing, but also like if you think everyone was so tolerant before, and then we see your uncle and the way that he talks about Muslims, that she's clearly belying some of the things that our main character is thinking with the ideas that some people hold. But I feel like it's a bit like, oh, you've got this uncle who's saying very, very extreme things, and then everyone else is tolerant. You don't have that, the normal, sensible, centrist people who are actually dangerous things, which is how things like this actually happen. Yeah, so I'm enjoying it more than I thought I would. Definitely more than The Marriage Plot, but it's not as good as Demon Copperhead. I started Pod by Lilane Paull, and this was the book I was least interested in, and then I saw Lilane say it's her favourite, and I became more interested in it, and I now have to say officially that I think I shouldn't trust Lilane's opinion on books, because I think that we have very different taste. After trusting her with The Elegance of the Hedgehog, which was so up its own arse I wanted to strangle a book, I feel like I have been betrayed again by Pod. This is the story of a spinner dolphin who can't spin, she can't hear the music of the water, and then there is also a fish and a whale and a bottlenose dolphin with from various different perspectives of creatures of the sea. But she's our main character, this spinner dolphin, who ends up away from her pod. What I keep thinking when I read this book is that it's not fantasy, but it reads very much like fantasy, because we are building a world, and Lilane Paull has taken elements of, I assume, what scientists, zoologists, marine zoologists, I don't know what you call it, but the people who look at dolphin and other marine animals' behaviour and interactions, she's taken elements of that to build a world. She's talking about language, science, history, the way different animals view their place and their culture, and it is very much world building. A lot of the book is world building, which feels very much like fantasy, and it is the part of fantasy that I don't like. I like fantasy that doesn't explain what's going on, but this book is very much like taking those ideas of how dolphins interact and turning it into a fantasy world. And the writing is, again, nothing special, nothing particularly interesting about this writing, except that it feels a little, I would say that the dialogue feels fairly cringy, and that's something I'm also struggling with in this book. I'm not really sure that I'm interested in the anthropomorphism of animals as such. I don't mind, like, I love Glory by No Violet Bulawayo, and I feel like that was more using animals as a way to distance but still talking about people, and I feel like I would like this to be further away from humanity. I feel like it should be less structured as a basic fantasy adventure novel. There should be something more interesting in the way that it's structured and the way that it's formed, because it's from the perspective of marine animals. But it is very much a plot-heavy, driven standard novel, but from the perspective of marine creatures. Like, one of the characters is a military dolphin, and so there are some talks about how humans are affecting the water, and I think there are going to be more of that. I think there's going to be like a climate change element to this book, but I just feel like, what was the point? Like, what's the point of writing a standard fantasy adventure from the perspective of dolphins? It doesn't feel like it's doing anything interesting, and it's not written particularly interestingly either. I think I should trust my gut, and this is the perfect cover for this book, because it is a fantasy adventure novel, not a literary novel. Hello, I look bald, but I promise I haven't shaved my head. It's really warm here. It's really warm here today. I'm too hot. That's why I look like a beetroot, and I'm going to keep this short. So I have finished Black Butterflies by Priscilla Morris, and I enjoyed this more than I was expecting to. As I said, I think when I talked about it halfway through, the writing is... there's nothing special to it. It is written in a very standard way, on a like line by line basis. Even sometimes it feels a little oversimplistic. It's not like it's a spare prose. It's like it's just written where the writing is not considered. The writing style is not kind of part of the making of this novel, and that's not usually the novels that I fall in love with, and I didn't fall in love with this one, but I did find myself enjoying it much more. I also said at the beginning that there's definitely this like tolerance is great politics through it, which I didn't love. I don't think the politics of this were the best, but the actual story, the narrative and the characters are really interesting. I think it did go a little into Sunday afternoon film territory, where occasionally the characters are living through the siege of Sarajevo in 1992, and there's winter being like the worst deaths in the Bosnian War. A very harrowing, difficult experience, and it does face up to that, but it definitely has the idea of community and of art as a way of like bringing people together and of celebrating humanity even in dark circumstances, and pulling as a way to like a coping mechanism. It definitely has that, but I think it did occasionally get a little schmaltzy in that respect. Those are the things that I would say I didn't like it, but overall the characters I think were well developed, and their experience of this horrible war I think felt very real. And I think obviously when reading about this, the siege of Sarajevo, at the current time, reading about it in 2023, it makes you think of Ukraine and the Kherson. Is it Kherson? And Bakhmut very much became present in my mind. So this is based on on various different parts of the author's family history. She had an uncle who was an artist during this. One of the events that happens towards the end of the novel is based on another, on her grandparents. And I think that you can really feel that sort of sense of oral history and like a knowledge of people who had first-hand experience of this. It feels very much like centered in the lives of people, which is something that I do enjoy in historical fiction like this. Pod, on the other hand, I can't believe how many people were praising this, because I don't understand. I really don't understand how you could have thought this was good. I did not enjoy this novel at all. It is written in that very over-the-top, saccharine, like earnest, I don't know what I mean, but it's trying so hard, and it's like really like, I have a message I want to tell you about climate change in the ocean, and I'm gonna smack you with it as hard as I can. Like, I'm not gonna have any subtlety, any nuance, everything is gonna just this book felt ridiculous in terms of the message. You're not actually giving this to me in a way that I can feel it. You are just shoving it in my face as hard as you can, and so I didn't enjoy that aspect of it. And I think if it hadn't been for all of the mystical dolphin orgies, this would have been YA. It reads like YA, and that's not an insult in terms of there's nothing wrong with YA, but it means that it's written, as I say, very in your face. You're not allowed to develop any ideas, to kind of work out what's going on, to not in a like thrillery way, but to like connect with the novel. It's just all like surface level. It's completely surface level. It's a very shallow book, sorry for the water pun, but it is very shallow. There is nothing to develop there. There is nothing to work with there. It is just, I have watched some David Attenborough and I'm going to give you the last 10 minutes impassioned speech over and over again, plus dolphin rape, and then magical dolphin orgasms at the end. This could have been interesting. Like, I thought that this was going to be stupid, and then I thought, well, actually, you could do something with the form of the novel. It reads like fantasy in that it develops the world of the dolphins and it talks about linguistics of the dolphins, but I think that if you'd integrated that into the prose instead of just info dumping all over the place, then it might have been interesting. But it isn't. It isn't interesting. I'm also halfway through Fire Rush, which I'm listening to on audio by Jacqueline Cricks, and I feel mixed feelings about this book. It is set in London in the 1970s. It's set like there's the race riots in Brixton going on, and it is set in the dub scene, dancehall, underground like dancehall music that is very political, and it is in relation to like police violence against black people in Britain at the time, mixing like Jamaican folklore. There's a lot about like duppies, and her seeing our main character sees ghosts or feels ghosts. There is a connection to ghosts. The place where they go, the music hall where they go, is literally in a crypt. I love ghost stories. I have a whole video about ghosts, literally ghost stories. I love it when people play with ghosts, and I kind of feel like it's not being done to the fullest extent here. I think it could be explored more, because when it first started to get introduced, I was really intrigued. The beginning of this book I thought was really strong. The way that it integrates rhythms from Jamaican influenced British music at the time, and the way that it uses kind of the rhythm in terms of and rhyme in terms of the prose as well, the way that the character would move from more of a patois to that kind of what became multicultural London English, and sort of a working class British, working class London. Our main character would kind of code switch between those things, and I think that that was done well. But I feel like it has started to pick up the pace a lot, and we are going at quite a clip, and I think that that is making it trying to do something interesting with the language, but I feel like the amount of plot and the language are kind of fighting with each other for position. And so we start with our main character, and she meets this man, Moose, at the club, and they start to form a relationship. But then stuff happens that is very political, and focus on the music and the focus on the relationships between our main character and her friends. It was kind of building a world, but I feel like a lot of that building of the world and a lot of the like ghost stuff and the rhythm and the sound of the words has got lost in the amount of plot that we are like currently going through. It's just, I started out with high expectations because I was enjoying what it was doing so much, particularly because I'm listening to it on audio and it has like music interwoven into it a little bit as well. One thing I will say though is that she says they're from Norwood, and then she says that's in West London, and I think she's inventing a place, but I'm from Norwood, which is in South London, so I'm a bit confused. Like, I'm from Crystal Palace, the other name for Crystal Palace is Upper Norwood, I went to primary school in South Norwood, I did drama in West Norwood, like I'm from Norwood, and that's in South London, that is not in West London. So I don't know, maybe there's another Norwood in West London. I don't know like the outer limits of West London as well. I'm like a South London girl and it's a big place, but I was a bit like, oh, they're in Norwood, oh, but not Norwood. Hello, it is Tuesday, which is the day that this video is hopefully going up, and I haven't spoken to you for a few days because I whacked my head on Sunday, and I haven't been quite right since. Fire Rush, I finished listening to the audiobook of that. I'm really glad I listened to it in audiobook because it weaves in music, and because it's such a book with such rhythm and rhyme, and like the style of the writing fits in with the kind of themes of dub and music. The code switching between the patois, the London English, and a more sort of standard English form was done really well. Overall, it's a book that I would say falls into the like good plot, good writing kind of thing, if that's something that you look for. Very plotty books that are also written well. I think this one falls into that. I think those books don't tend to be my favourite a lot of the time. I'm not really here, I don't really want a lot of plot in my books, because whilst I think that our main character in particular was well developed, and there was a lot of like subtlety and nuance in the ways that it was discussing politics and the different characters it had standing in for different things, including our main character's father and one of her her two best friends, and other people in her life. I think they were well developed to an extent, but I think there's only so much you can develop when you have such a like plotty book. There was a lot that happened, a lot of travelling between London, Bristol, Jamaica, a lot of sort of veering off the expected path. It was a lot about our main characters, the way that the racial politics of the time and historically between Britain and Jamaica and people who are the descendants of enslaved people, the ways that like deters paths that you think you can be on, was, like I say, done well for that. But for me, super plotty books are not really my thing. So I think it was good for what it was, but what it was not my style. I think there could have been more done with the kind of rhythm and the music of it, but that would have been not compatible really with a lot of plot, because it would have left you with confusion, and I think I would have preferred that. The wonderful language that was used and the wonderful look at politics, I think it was not too on the nose in a way that annoys me about some books. I think it was quite on the nose, but in a way that felt in keeping with the themes of like dubbed music. And so I thought that was, yeah, I thought overall it was well done. It was a good look at the time period, but I think maybe trying to pack a little too much into a little book for my personal preference. But if you are someone who reads more plotty books, I definitely think it would keep going for you. And then I also finished Trespasses, and I haven't talked to you about this book at all. This book is set in Belfast in the 1970s, the early 1970s, and is about a woman called Cusla, who is a teacher in a suburban town on the edge of Belfast, which is an integrated community rather than being divided between the Protestants and the Catholics. If you don't know your Northern Irish history, so this is set during the Troubles, during the bloodiest period of the Troubles in the early 70s. And so each day at school, Cusla starts with the news. She doesn't want to, but it's a part of the thing that the school makes her do, that students tell what has been happening, what has happened on the news. And that can be stories of people dying, of bombs going off, but also things like one boy that his daddy's got a job. And so each of the chapters as we go through become starting off with the news of what has happened, what has gone on. And Cusla, she also works in her brother's pub. Her brother has a pub in a Protestant area of town, and there she meets Michael Agnew, who is a barrister, a Protestant barrister who was a friend of her father's, who works for human rights. He was part of the human rights movement, and he defends a lot of people who have been involved with or accused of being involved with activities of the IRA. It's built around the Troubles, but it is very much built around Cusla, her family, her alcoholic mother, and her difficult family relationships, and also her relationship with this man, this older married Protestant barrister. I really, really enjoyed this book. It broke my heart. I'm not a huge emotional reactor to books a lot of the time, but after I finished this book, I was crying for like 5 minutes, and I'm like tearing up now just thinking about it. Like it really moved me. Cusla is a teacher, and so her relationship with some of the kids in her school, the one of the parts, the first part that made me cry is not a spoiler. It's where this wee boy who's in her class wins a race, and I cried like I was his mummy. Like it was so moving, and it's written in this really effortless style, but then has moments of like beauty peering through, and in terms of the writing, but also in terms of the plot. Like it's about trying to live a normal life in a war zone, in a war, much in a similar way to Black Butterflies, but this war is obviously much more explicit. This war is, you pretend that the war is not happening, you don't even call it a war, it's the Troubles. And I've mentioned before on this channel that my mum is from Derry, and so Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland, that history and that time period is something that is of personal interest to me. It's something I potentially know more about than other people who grew up in England, because my mum, she wouldn't have been an age with Cusla, she's more of the Waynes in her class. My mum would have been their age. It is of a personal interest to me, but I don't think that's why it moved me so much. The characters, they all feel so well developed. All of them feel really true and real people, which I can't say the same for all of the other books. They're slow moving, and so like you really get to feel what the feeling of the time period, the atmosphere is really well evoked. And whilst all of these characters are doing things that you don't necessarily think are good, like Michael, the barrister, is having an affair with this much younger woman in a way that is creepy, but at the same time he feels such a realistic, you can still feel for him and the nuances of it. It's so well done. And I really, really, yeah, this book made me cry. This book gave me full body goosebumps at some points. It's the book that I've definitely had the most like visceral reaction to, and maybe that's in part because of that like family history connection, but I don't think so. I think it's the strength of this book. There were moments, I will say, where I was reading this where I was like, am I loving this as much, where there would be a lull in the writing. And so I think there are parts of this that could have been slightly more tightly edited and a slightly shorter book, but that's so nitpicky. For this book, it is wonderful. I think I have to give it to Demon Copperhead though. In terms of the Women's Prize, I think that the writing of Demon Copperhead, the ambition of it was much bigger than something like Trespasses. The scope of it and the voice, the way that it really got into that narrative voice, because this, whilst it is does sound like the way people would speak. I would say that the narrative voice isn't so like embedded in a Belfast way of speaking, a Northern Irish way of speaking, to the same extent that Demon Copperhead is. And so I think that I would say Demon Copperhead is still my favourite, and in terms of the prize, I think it was a little more ambitious. I think this was a very straightforward, like, chronological novel that was telling a story really, really well, but it wasn't playing as much with form, it wasn't doing anything as innovative, which I feel like Demon Copperhead was. So I would still say that Demon Copperhead, if we're going to rank them, oh, and I also think that this year has redeemed the Women's Prize for me, because whilst I didn't absolutely love all of the books, I only hated one of them. The Stupid Dolphin book is the only book that I didn't like. The rest of the books all had something of merit and something to speak to me. They weren't all books that I would recommend or want to read again, but they were all books that I could see why they were on the prize. This one was stupid. Just stupid, but the rest of them I could see. So yeah, this one would definitely be my 6th place. If this one wins, maybe I don't trust the Women's Prize anymore. I mean, like I said, written like YA, cloying, over the top, mystical dolphin sex scenes. I don't like any mystical sex scenes between humans or anything, but dolphin sex scenes, definitely not. There's like magic orgasms. I do not have the sentimentality needed to enjoy a book like this. This book is in your face, and it is cloying. There is another word that I want for it. Sentimental. It's not that, but it's something along those lines. It feels sticky, treacly, and fake to me, and I can't get it up for this book. So this one would be at the bottom. Then I would put The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell as second from the bottom, because I didn't find it particularly interesting. I found the voice to be identical to Hamnet, and I didn't feel like it really moved on or done anything more than Hamnet. Middle-aged white feminist in the way that it was dealing with the history. Then I would say that Fire Rush would go on top of that, because for me that personally isn't what I want in a book, because I think that it was just a bit too plotty, and it sacrificed some things for the amount of plot it was going for. But that, I think, is definitely more of a personal taste thing. Then we'd have Black Butterflies, which really surprised me, because again, it's not really doing anything special in terms of the writing, but I really felt it's just an emotional reaction to this. I think that it did well. And then I would put Trespasses on top of that, but like, I think this might be one of my favourite books of the year, and it's still not at the top, because that's how much I love Demon Copperhead. So yeah, I think Demon Copperhead and Trespasses are both going to end up in my favourite books of the year. Definitely my favourite books of the year so far that I do in the beginning of July. But yeah, there's to have two of my favourite books of the year be in the shortlist is pretty good going for the Women's Prize. So if Trespasses win or Demon Copperhead wins, I'll be pretty happy. If Pod wins, I'm going to have to write a sternly worded letter, I think. So, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please do let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. The Women's Prize will be announced tomorrow, so we'll find out if they are in line with my thinking, or if they completely disagree with me. We'll have to find out together. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe. I put out new videos twice a week, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.